Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alden Gansky, up in Central California, the author of 45 books, both fiction and nonfiction. It's good to be with you again, Aaron, on First in Fiction.
Likewise, thank you. Glad to have you back. Looking forward to a great discussion today. We got a lot to talk about tonight, so much so that we're probably not going to get to it all. And so I'm going to do something a little bit crazy here. I'm going to postpone, at least for now, our first line winner. There's several reasons for it, but the first reason is because I forgot to check them before I started the show, and now we are live, and it would be really awkward for me to sit there and scroll through them all. So I have dropped the ball on that one, but we're just going to pretend that it's because we have so much great content tonight, which we do.
Confession is good for the soul, so...
there you go. So I guess my soul is good now, but
and so is public humiliation. So
yeah, and I'm doubly blessed tonight. I'm doubly blessed. What have you been up to tonight, Pops?
Oh, well, tonight it's been kind of a busy day. Had a little birthday thing to go through, but just finished editing Angie Hunt's new contribution to the Harbingers called Infestation. That comes out in a couple of weeks. You could probably pre-order it over on Amazon. Remember, this is the series of novellas, sort of like watching a television series. You get a chunk each time. And I just finished editing hers. She edits mine, and it's just sort of this kind of thing. So lots of fun, good story there. And working with a private client and all kinds of little odds and ends and things and stuff. So,
yeah.
But you've got some news. Something's happening very soon.
I do. The release of Hand of Adonai, the first book in the series called The Book of Things to Come, is rapidly approaching. August 25th is our target date here. Looks like that's when I'll be doing my book launch on Facebook. And we've got some other things that I'm planning. Molly Jo, my social media manager, has been cooking up some plans, and I've been talking with the publisher. So we've got some... hopefully some exciting things coming down the line, so be sure to keep your eye open for that. But the biggest thing that I wanted to say, you'll notice my link down here on the bottom is a little bit different. I'll leave it in the show notes. I won't bother to spell it out here because it's too long. But the first book is now available for pre-order, and you can get it for the very low price of $10 if you want the paperback. If you want the Kindle version, it's only $2. Which means I won't make a lot of money, but you'll get a really good book for really cheap. So make sure you go out and buy several copies, not only for yourself, but your children and your grandchildren and their grandchildren, however many children you have, and friends.
Everyone in the city in which you live.
Yeah, I think our publisher was hoping for 2,000 pre-orders. So I'm kind of going for 2 million. So if you guys could help out with that, just every pre-order helps. There's my shameless self-promotion, but it's exciting. It's getting real. I'm excited as we draw ever closer to it. Been a lot of years in the work, and it's good to see it getting this far. So excited about that.
Yeah, congratulations. So it's just really a few weeks out before it arrives. I ordered mine today, and I couldn't get the ebook yet. I don't think that'll be available until it actually releases. I thought they might send me a notice or something that I could now download it, but at least for the moment, I couldn't get the ebook.
Yeah,
but I plan to get it also. So yeah, looking forward to that. Congratulations.
Thank you, Pops. Thank you, and congratulations to you on the Harbingers series too. Also, very exciting. I love the idea of the synoptic kind of novels or novellas working together, several authors. It's great serialization kind of a concept. So
at the end of each book, there's a teaser for the next book, and I'm the next book up. So I'm just getting started on it. And so I had to write the teaser, and I creeped myself out. So
ooh.
I always like that when that happens. I figure if I creep myself out, then maybe there's at least one other person that'll find it gripping.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Absolutely. Well, Pops, you were at least diligent in your duties, and you secured a publishing term for the week, and that's work for hire.
Yeah, work for hire really can apply to several professions, but in writing, it has very specific meaning. And I've done several of these. A work for hire is where a publisher or an individual, a private client, maybe sometimes they're corporations and stuff, hire you to do something. And what a work for hire is, you're hired to produce a bit of writing, whatever it might be. So, since I do mostly book length stuff, I'm occasionally hired to do a bit of nonfiction or of book length, and or fiction occasionally, or to fix someone else's stuff with that. So, but what work for hire means is you have been hired to do this. You will be paid a flat fee unless you strike some other arrangement, which sort of takes it out of the work for hire category. But you won't get royalties. You might get an advance because you're doing work up front. So, if you can, you want to get some kind of advance on it. But there won't be royalties. Very often your name doesn't appear on the book. I've got several that don't have my name on it. Every once in a while, if you've been around a while, they want your name on the book because, in my case, there's some misguided idea that my name will sell a book. I haven't found that to be true, but nonetheless, they think, well, it probably wouldn't hurt it too much. But that's what a work for hire is, and you sign a separate kind of contract. It's not a typical book contract, and what it does is you release all your rights to it. Whoever you're working for can do what they want with it. They can change it. They can edit it differently. You really have no say-so in it. It's just done, and it becomes there. So you've been hired to produce a work for a flat fee. So if you like some of the, I'm going to call them low-end science fiction. What I mean by that is they're not traditionally published, but there used to be a bunch of Star Trek novels that would come out. There are a bunch of Star Wars novels. Sometimes there's mysteries and things like that, and those are very often work for hire. They'll pay you some money, whatever it is, to write this book, but you have no say-so in it after it's done. Yeah. So that's our term for the week, and it's work for hire, and a lot of writers do it to come up with pizza money. We'll be talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he wrote a bunch of short stories so he could afford to keep working on his novels, and he even went to Hollywood to write movies because it takes less time to write a movie than it does to write a book. And so in a sense, that's almost work for hire. It's not really quite the same thing, but
Vonnegut did a lot of that as well. He talks about that, and if you pick up his biography, there's some mention of that. He did some television, he did some movies, did a lot of stage plays. Not a lot of people know that, but he did. I do hope that your name sells books. I hope that's not as misguided as you let on, because if your name sells books, then maybe they'll pick up my book because I'm using the same name. The first name's a little different. But
I probably should have warned you about this, that you probably should have used a nom de plume, a pseudonym, because in the writing world, the name Gansky is kind of like an anchor.
Okay.
So, I probably should have mentioned that earlier before your books came out. So
strong, solid, very grounded. Sure. Necessary for life. It makes sense. So. Well, we are going to be talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald today. Last week we talked about Raymond Carver. And before we jump in, I want to say a couple things. First of all, I just want to give you a quick warning that a lot of the advice that we're going to dispense today, we don't necessarily agree with. I know that he said quite a few things that I was like, I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with that, but he does it makes us think, at least. It does gives us some pause, a moment to reflect on what we really think about our writing. And so there's going to be some great lines that he has. But before we get to that, if you are not familiar with F. Scott Fitzgerald, obviously you've heard of The Great Gatsby, I'm assuming, but you may not know much about him beyond that. Pops, you put together a couple notes on his bio.
Yeah, just briefly, it's always good to have some background on the person that we're talking about. F. Scott Fitzgerald was born in 1896, so you can see that he's several eras back, and he was living through what he would call a jazz age, and that became a term that's still used today. In the turn of the century after World War I, everything changed. And I could go on for hours talking about the changes. We went from Gibson girls with the high hair and the big dresses to flappers. Everything changed right after the war, which often happens after a major war. And that's the time that he lived in. So there were speakeasies, there was prohibition, there was this sense that everyone wanted to party, and that was a good bit of his life. What a lot of people may not realize is it's F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald is his full name, because he was related to Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. But he went by F. Scott Fitzgerald in his writing. So he's related to the guy who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Always knew he wanted to write. He published his first piece at the age of 13 when he was in school. It was a mystery that he wrote, and was published in a school paper, and he published soon after that. However, as often the case with very creative people, he had kind of an up and down career. Right as World War I was breaking out, he left Princeton. He went to Princeton to further his education. Excuse me. And just shortly after that, in fact, during World War I, the former president of Princeton was the president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. So there's kind of an interesting connection there. But he, because he spent so much time writing, he was failing his grades, and so he quit the school. And he enlisted in the Army, became a second lieutenant, went into the South for his training. He never made it overseas. The war ended shortly after that. But while he was there, he met Zelda, who would become his wife. And it sounds like a special love story. They loved to party. The downside of that is he became an alcoholic, and he would die young because of that. She had mental instability. He suffered from depression, which I think may be a requirement for being a creative, is to deal with depression. His depression led to alcoholism. At times his wife was, for a couple of years at a time, would be put in a hospital, and so that weighed on him quite a bit. His first book he submitted to Scribner's Sons, and it was rejected, but they asked for more. They saw the kind of the great work that he was doing, and he would then go on to write several books. His first book, Beautiful and the Damned, I think it is, did very well for him, sold something like 50,000 copies, and in those early years, that'd be 1922, in those early years, that was quite a bit of money, so he was able to marry Zelda, who was holding off to make sure that she could support him, and then it was kind of downhill from there. And he had lots of ups and downs, writer's block that lasted many months at a time, and had a great deal of trouble. Wrote The Great Gatsby, and it did all right, but it didn't hit big till the 50s or the 60s, long after he was dead. And then it became a requirement at school, which sometimes happens. And then the short end of this, we just ended here. Of course, he made his mark. Knew Ernest Hemingway very well. They were great buddies for a long time, and then they ended up becoming more enemies than buddies. Hemingway got to where he couldn't stand him anymore. So partly because of the drinking, even though Papa Hemingway, he'd been known to knock back a few himself throughout his life. He died at the age of 44 in 1940, December 21st, shortest day of the year. And he died that day in Hollywood. In fact, you'll mention her in your notes. I noticed her. She was a gossip columnist, and apparently he died in her apartment there in the early 40s there. So sort of a sad, well, he died at 44. It was in 1940. Yeah, and it's sort of a sad story. And he got so bad at times he borrowed a lot of money from his publisher, Scribner's. So Maxwell Perkins was often sending money his way against, as an advance against future royalties. So he sort of spiraled in, both in the writing and in his career, I should say. His writing still is very famous, but sort of spiraled in. So there it is.
So we see another famous writer depressed and an alcoholic. So we got the trend going. And then we got Hemingway too. So I mean, there we go. So,
yeah, and Hemingway thought himself superior to Fitzgerald. Of course, they couldn't be any more different in their writing styles. But Hemingway suffered from depression a great deal, was alcoholic, and ultimately took his life. So kind of strange.
in all fairness to Fitzgerald, Hemingway had a habit of making friends with writers that were more famous than him, and then denying that they were ever friends to begin with once he was more famous than them. So that kind of, as a matter of fact, we'll talk about this later. Well, I guess we could talk about it now. Fitzgerald famously criticized The Sun Also Rises. Hemingway sent it to Fitzgerald and said, "What do you think?" And Fitzgerald said, very calmly and rationally, "Look, there's some really, really great stuff here, but chapters 1 and 2 are not working. You're going to have to really revise them. Don't do anything rash like throwing them out, but just restructure them. Try it this way or that way. And so Hemingway said, "Forget it," and tore out chapters 1 and 2, and there you go. So The Sun Also Rises, what you see on page 1 is actually chapter 3, but they had that kind of a relationship. What we're going to talk about today, though, is the letters that Fitzgerald wrote, not necessarily his fiction, but as a famous writer in his time, a lot of people would send him questions about how to write, how to become a writer, what types of things do you need to do. And he was very diligent about responding to them. And so I've taken several of these letters and I've gone through them and kind of pulled out some of the quotes that he has there to talk about those and what we can learn from them. I do want to let you guys know that we've got more to do here than we'll get through tonight. We're just not going to have enough time in 1 hour to get through all of this. So we're going to do our best, and whatever we don't get through will be on the show notes at aarongansky.com. And I usually put those up on very late Sunday evening, early Monday morning, right around midnight on Monday is when they post at aarongansky.com. So what we don't get to tonight, you can find there. Welcome back, Pops. We missed you.
Well, I missed you. You just disappeared. I thought maybe it was something I said, or the garlic I had at dinner. I didn't know you were just gone.
You disappeared. So maybe we both disappeared. We'll find out how that goes. Hopefully it goes all right. So A Life in Letters. One of the first things that he wrote, one of the first things that really stood out to me was this quote when he responded to Frances Turnbull, who was a student at Radcliffe at the time, and she requested feedback on her latest story. And when you start writing and you've got some publications under your belt, aspiring writers come out of the woodwork to talk to you. And so that was the case with him. And he tells her, this is his advice to her. He says, "You've got to sell your heart, your strongest reactions, not the little minor things that only touch you lightly, the little experiences that you might tell at dinner." It was necessary for Dickens to put into Oliver Twist a child's passionate resentment at being abused and starved and that had haunted his whole childhood. Ernest Hemingway's first stories in our time went right down to the bottom of all that he had ever felt and known. In This Side of Paradise, I wrote about a love affair that was still bleeding as fresh as the skin wound on a hemophile, which we would now call a hemophiliac. And so this is his advice to Frances Turnbull. And there's a couple things I think that he's really trying to get to. He's saying that our stories must come from the most emotionally impactful things that have happened to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I've often, with my students when I'm teaching at writers' conferences and stuff, and I will tell them, if in your writing, if you've not made yourself cry, if you've not made yourself laugh, if you've not made yourself feel comfortable, if you've not made yourself uncomfortable, then you're probably not doing it right. Your readers won't feel any of those things either. You've got to be able to share something from your own experience. And that's probably one reason why very young people, Fitzgerald might be the exception to this, don't do well as novelists out the gate. They have to have a little seasoning, a little pain. If you're Dickens, well, you've been abused as a child and stuff and had a lot of poverty. So, that started early. But there's some life experience that helps a novelist write. And when you've got some pain in your life, you can use it. And one of the interesting things I've noticed about writers is it doesn't matter what they're going through. Sooner or later, a line will pop in their head. It says, "I might be able to use this." And that's their catharsis, is to be able to take that pain and pour it into a story.
And I do want to make a point here, though, that this is going to surprise you, Pops, but I had a pretty decent life growing up. I've had my share of heartache, but you were not an alcoholic. I hope you don't mind me divulging that on the air. I say you were not. You are not. nor were you ever an alcoholic. No, no history of abuse or anything. And so if you look at my life, I've had a pretty decent life. So it might worry me as a writer that I've had a pretty decent life. Does that mean that I have nothing to offer fiction? And I don't think that's really what he's trying to say. I think what he's trying to say is, as good as my life has been, I've still found plenty of opportunity to be depressed and lonely and the love loss and all of these things, broken hearts, etc. The things that you go through in life, and I can tap into those, even though I've never been divorced. I have suffered a broken heart, so I can kind of put myself into that situation. So really, what I think is our challenge is the experiences that we haven't had. If we're writing about an experience that we've not had, we need to make sure that we're doing enough research and that we're able to really, as Brett Anthony Johnston would say, deeply imagining the emotions that are tied to that, tapping into the emotion, perhaps magnifying it a little bit, dwelling on it, thinking about it until we can feel those things, perhaps even without having to actually experience it. So don't make the mistake to think that you have nothing to offer fiction if you haven't had a tumultuous life. I don't think that's what he's going for here. I think what he's saying is we've all experienced deep emotion, and it's that deep emotion that needs to make its way onto the page.
Yeah, and if you're a fiction writer, and that's what this podcast is all about, is writing fiction and novels, with that, you have to have that ability to displace from where you are and be in someone else's skin. There's an empathy skill that is necessary so that you can describe for the reader so that they can understand what your character is going through. And it takes a little time. So I've experienced things. I've been to outer space on the space shuttle. I didn't really go there. I didn't need to. I did enough research. Once I had that, I could invest myself in it. So there is a step where you can imagine what it is like. That's what we do. We're Imagineers. We can imagine what it's like. What does that feel like? We'll ask all those key questions and then impart that emotion also, not just the actions, but the emotion, be it good or bad, into our characters. Not to be sappy. That's one thing you want to stay away from. You don't want to get too sappy. You don't want to get overly emotional, but you want to be able to get that idea across. And the writers who can strike that fine line between being sappy but making sure that a strong emotion, whether it's anger, whether it's sorrow, whatever it is, love, they can get that across. That makes a huge difference in the writing, and they often become some of the best writers.
Agreed. Winter Dreams is that way. I think it really finds that balance of kind of a broken heart kind of a story, the first tragic love story kind of a thing. But he really walks that line where it might border on melodrama, especially at the end, but it doesn't feel like it because the words are so fresh and new, and the experience, though it's been, explored several times by countless fiction writers, it seems fresh still. It's unique. It's individual. I kind of go back to that old saying that every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way, right? So everybody has a tragic love story, but everybody's tragic love story is different, and finding the nuances there and how each one is unique. It's really what you want to focus in on. And that's going to keep it from bordering on that melodrama, to keep it out of that kind of sappy realm. Melodrama really stems from imprecise language, and cliche kind of descriptions, these well-worn tropes that no longer have any sort of emotional impact because we've read it a million times. And so avoiding that and making it unique to your characters is going to help you kind of avoid that. And so you can still get away with a little more of the emotional writing than you normally would. If you have time, a good contrast in studies is to read F. Scott Fitzgerald and then read Ernest Hemingway. They both wrote about, tragic love stories in a lot of ways, but they're vastly, vastly different. People often ask, what did F. Scott Fitzgerald write? And I said, he wrote about rich people crying. What did Hemingway write? He wrote about old soldiers crying. So, that's what it is. But so there's that goes into that. And he talks about that, this idea of this first tragic love story. He says, I'm trying to remember, I think this is in the same letter. He says, the amateur seeing how the professional, having learned all that he'll learn about writing, can take a trivial thing such as the most superficial reactions of three uncharacterized girls and make it witty and charming. The amateur thinks he or she can do the same. But the amateur can only realize his ability to transfer his emotions to another person by some such desperate and radical expedient as tearing your first tragic love story out of your heart and putting it on the pages for people to see. You don't get a right, he says, about, three uncharacterized girls and make it witty and charming until we've ripped that heart out and we've sold that heart and we've put it on the page for people to see. That's kind of the point that he's making here. I don't know if you agree with that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I do agree with it. And again, it's not that you have to experience every situation. If fiction writers can't do that, you don't want to do that. But nonetheless, you can place yourself for a short period of time into those things. And I've noticed as a writer over the years, over a couple of decades now, that I've become more emotional because I've been dealing with emotions in different characters, both good and bad, both the antagonist and the protagonist, from killers to mothers who, think they're going to lose their children. And that's just a whole bunch of emotion. And it needs to be personal. I've written scenes where I finish the scene and I quit for the day. It's not because I think I've hit my number, my word count. It's just because I'm beat. I just can't do it anymore. I have to get away. I have to go do something else. And here's an interesting thing, Aaron. Not a lot of people know this, but the human mind has difficulty distinguishing between reality and fiction. So that's why movies work. When we go to movies, we know it's a two-dimensional portrayal by actors and by cameramen and directors to tell a story. Let's go to a 3D movie, then it's still a two-dimensional movie that looks 3D with that. But nonetheless, when we watch, let's say, a scary movie and something happens, we jump. I remember watching Alien when it first came out. Scary movie. It's really horror in space. And I kept telling myself, it's just a movie. It's not going to frighten me. And there's a scene where the creature jumps out of the pod and hits this guy on the face. And, and I'm screaming like a Girl Scout. And everyone in the theater was doing that. And even though I knew, I could tell you logically, this isn't real. It never happened. And that thing's made of rubber. It didn't matter. My brain for a while could not tell the difference. It's the same thing with reading. If you can get your reader to invest, to immerse in it, then they're not going to be able to distinguish between reality and with fiction. That's why occasionally you'll get letters saying things, I'm halfway through your book and you better not kill this character off. And you want to write back and say, why? The person doesn't even exist. But, right. They're not going to buy that. And by the way, there's only a few groups who can make this kind of claim where you go in and tickle someone's mind. You leave your fingerprints on their brain. And that's actors and writers and those who give moving public speeches. You get to go in and fiddle with their brains. And some of the imagery you write, some of the emotions will never leave your reader. They will be there as long as that person's alive.
I agree. It's one of those things where I think our fear is to write what we fear. And that was kind of a mantra at Antioch, write what you fear, write what you fear, write what you fear. And going into Antioch, I had a list of 2 or 3 things that were so horrendous to imagine. I told myself I would never write about them, but I'd heard the mantra so much that I thought, okay, I'm going to write about my fears. One of them was about child abuse. And so I wrote a story which contained a scene of child abuse. One was about my children dying. And so I wrote a story in which a child dies. And it to this day, I don't reread those stories. I wrote them and I will not go back and read them. I've, had to go back and reread them and edit them a few times before, turning them in for workshops and the like, but I can't go back to them. I still fear those things, but I would say that my writing has improved and I understand people in a new way. And it was horrifying to do. I didn't enjoy it, but I would say that my writing improved from it. And so I think that's kind of what Fitzgerald is getting at here. If you're not willing to tear your heart out a little bit, write what you're afraid of. It doesn't have to be for publication. Please don't, put this up on your blog post or whatever. It might just be a writing exercise that you do, and then maybe you delete the file. Maybe you save it for later, but it doesn't have to be something that's public. It just has to be something that you can do because I think it's more the process. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not the actual writing of it. It's the process of feeling those emotions, confronting them, dealing with them, and working through them so that you understand what it's like for those who have to horribly have to face that in life. So I think that's kind of what he's getting at here is write what you're afraid of. I might say it that way.
Yeah, and it can be grueling. And for me, that is the way I can tell if it's working, if it's eating me up, or if it's making me laugh. Again, it doesn't have to be negative. Some of my best friends are my characters because they're just really funny. I'm thinking of Perry Sachs and some of the others in my stories. Maddie Glenn, Mayor Maddie Glenn, funny woman. Some of the guys are just funny in the way they work with each other. So I love being around them, and I end up leaving a day of writing feeling really good. And then there are those like in Zero G where I have an astronaut. Most of his crew has died. He's on the space shuttle, and he's pretty sure he's going to die. And he's talking to his wife. And there's kids that are there. She brought her kids with him, so she has to limit what she can say. He has to limit what he can say. But how do you get these ideas across? And I sometimes use that when teaching, and I have yet to be able to get through that scene now years later without tearing up when I read it. And I'm not trying to say I'm the world's best writer at that thing. It's just even now, and even though I'm the creator of that scene, I can't tell the difference between reality and fiction on that. It's just too grueling for me to do that. Now, whether or not he dies or not, you have to buy the book and read it. Zero G.
Yeah. You should pick it up. You should pick it up. Interesting, though, that you say you're the creator and you still can't get through it without tearing up. And I feel that same way about some of those stories that I wrote. It's why I don't go back to them often, quite honestly. There's almost a strange disconnection from the art that you've produced and the process that it took to go through it. I think I don't go back to them in part because I don't want to remember it. I don't want to remember what it felt like when I wrote it. I've kind of blocked that out of my mind, but very interesting thing. And once you can start doing that, then those small interchanges between three uncharacterized women, then you can start making that witty and memorable because you've experienced the range of human emotion on a level that most people are afraid to do. And so you'll understand the subtleties and the nuances, and you'll understand that though there are three uncharacterized women, they're still real people, and they're going to act in such a way. And so little kind of details are going to set them apart. And I think the amateur writer kind of misses that, and that's why they fall into cliche. Cliche is I always think of cliches. They're not necessarily bad unless they're in a final draft. They're fine in a first draft. All they are, it's just a placeholder that says I need to get more emotional here. I need to go a little bit deeper. I need to find more originality in how I want to say this. So I encourage you to embrace your cliches in your first draft. Just make sure you highlight them or something so that on your second read through before anybody else looks at it, you can fix them and find something better. Go ahead, Pops.
Yeah, if the emotion's not real, the reader will not get lost in your book. And one of my friends, and I've read many of her books, her husband is president and is killed, and she sees it. And in the original story of the book, she sees this happen. She turns and walks away. And I say, no. Nobody gets to do that. If you're going to bring me to this point, all right, I need to see a reaction. Now, I'm not talking about pages and pages of sobbing and weeping and the, renting of clothing and pulling out hair. A paragraph will do it. Even a short paragraph will do it. And the reader will invest in it. They will add everything that's missing in it. They will bring the emotion, which is the gasoline, and they'll pour it on the fire that you built. But you have to give them enough to be able to do that. Writers, in many ways, are like actors who studied method acting. And method actors feel what it is that they're acting. They're not going through the motions. That's why they cry. There's real tears. That's when they laugh because they think it's really funny, even though they've done this 50 times. They're lost in it. And I think writing requires that we get lost in that world. Otherwise, it's artificial. It's plastic if you don't.
I agree. I like what you say there about the reader bringing their own can of gasoline to the story, and that you're building a fire. I would say that sometimes the biggest fires start with a little spark. So sometimes you don't even have to build the fire. You just need to give them some dry wood, give them some tinder, give them a spark, and let them handle the rest. And so I like that you say that. Moving on to the next one, we could probably spend an entire episode on that, but we'll move on here real quick. Fitzgerald says, I might say that the writing is smooth and agreeable. Trying to remember who this was to. I think it might be the same person. Oh, yeah, same person. She says, I might say that the writing is smooth and agreeable, and some of the pages very apt and charming. You have talent, which is the equivalent of a soldier having the right physical qualifications for entering West Point. The idea here is that even though you've got some qualifications, it doesn't mean you're going to be great. Talent can only take you so far. It's kind of like what Raymond Carver said when we looked at that last week about all writers have talent. I've never known one who didn't have it, but beyond talent, there's something else. There's the drive, there's the determination, there's a passion. There's lots of talented writers that just don't have the passion. When I was at Antioch, one of my fellow students asked a mentor, they said, you've seen a lot of students come through this program. What's the difference between those who are successful and those who are not successful? Is it just the talent that they have? And he goes, oh, no. He goes, the most talented writers I've seen end up not publishing because they write one really good thing and then they're done. He says, but sometimes it's the least talented writers who spend the time developing their craft, honing it, working at it, that turn into the great writers because they continue to write. You're never going to publish 2 books if you only write 1. And so talent is great to have, but if you feel like because you're a talented writer that you're going to be famous, there's a lot more to it than just that.
And even if you're a great writer, doesn't mean you're going to be famous. There's no formula for that. It happens. Lousy writers become famous. We've seen plenty of that. So fame isn't the measure. It's how long the story endures, how long it sticks with the reader. Otherwise I would be just writing the equivalent of Big Macs and French fries. I've got to have something a little bit more than that. And I love this quote. The equivalent of a soldier having the right physical qualifications for entering West Point doesn't mean the person's going to be a great soldier. Just qualifies at this point. It's what you do with that talent.
I was just watching the NFL top 10. They've got top 10 this, top 10 that, and they just had one about quarterbacks. Top 10, I think they called it quarterback teases, like quarterbacks that you think are going to be great, but then they turn out not to be so great. And a couple of them they listed, they go, man, this guy is just, he's huge. He's massive. They talk about Tim Tebow. He's bigger than a linebacker. He runs like a fullback. Like, you just think this is going to be a quality quarterback. He wins games. Can't throw the ball, but, he wins games. And so that kind of it's the same thing with writing. Like, you can have all that talent. You can be the biggest and the strongest. Doesn't mean you're going to be the best. You can be a naturally gifted athlete. I think of Randy Moss, and nobody's going to doubt that he has talent, and he's probably going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, sure. But you think of his career numbers, and you think, what would those look like if he didn't take off 2 or 3 plays a quarter? You know what I'm saying? You watch him on film, and there are certain plays where they hike the ball, and he just stands in his position because he's not doing anything. Like, how much better would he have been if he actually put forth the effort it requires? And so talent will take you to a certain point, but it can't take you all the way.
Another sports illustration then goes back for a while, back a ways, the San Diego Padres with Tim Flannery. Tim Flannery's with the Giants now as a coach. I think he's a third base coach. But nonetheless, he would often be described as well, he's not the most talented man on the field, but he is the man who works the hardest. And he worked, and he's right. He did not have the same natural, innate abilities as some of the other great athletes on the field, but those other great athletes did not work as hard as he did. And so he played professional ball for a very long time, is still involved with professional ball because he did the very best he could and he kept at it. And the same thing with writing. You keep at it.
I had a guy on my football team when I played in high school that was the same way. He was an all-conference wide receiver, and he was about my height, maybe even a little bit shorter, was not very big. And I remember the coach chewing out the rest of the wide receivers. You know, you're running lazy routes. You're not watching the ball into your hands. You're making all these little mistakes. And he pointed the guy out. He says, all conference wide receiver because he does the little things. He does it right. And he's not the biggest and the brightest and the most talented guy on the team, but he's consistent and he makes those catches and he runs those routes. So it's not necessarily just talent. It's how you use that talent, how you put it to work. It's the work ethic that comes with it.
Yeah, the investment in the process, right?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, F. Scott Fitzgerald was also a writer, wanted to be at least a writer. And so he had some really interesting things to say to his daughter about the craft. And he says to her, nobody ever became a writer just by wanting to be one. If you have anything to say, anything you feel nobody has ever said before, you have got to feel it so desperately that you will find some way to say it that nobody has ever found before, so that the thing you have to say and the way of saying it blend as one matter and indissolubly as if they were conceived together. Extra points for saying indissolubly. I should just stop now.
Yeah, that was easy for you to say.
Oh man, it's been I was up at 3:15 this morning. Ask me why.
Hey, why were you up? I was up at 3:30. But good anyway. Why were you up at 3:15?
I have no idea. I'm still trying to figure that out. I blame you though. I mean, you sleep like garbage, and I sleep like garbage. So it's in our genes.
Yeah. So, well, it's just the nature of being creative, I guess. It's not.
Yeah. There you go.
Never mind. Just forget that.
All right.
Yeah.
So, but this kind of also backs up what we were saying. You know, it really, I think, solidifies it. Nobody became a writer just by wanting to be one. I think it was you that told me everybody wants to have written a book. Everybody wants a book on the shelf with their name on it, but very few people are willing to actually sit down and write it. Was it you that said that to me?
Yeah, because I've experienced it at many different levels. It is, the old saying is, it's far more fun to have written than it is to write, because writing is work, and there are days that are glorious, and there are days where you just want to quit and go sell appliances at Sears or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that job, but for a writer, that would probably be an uncomfortable position to be in. You have to write if you're a writer. There are good days, there are bad days. The professional writer keeps writing no matter what. Good or bad. You can always fix the bad later, but you just you stay with it. So yeah, it's well, I encounter a lot of people that love to talk about writing and what they're writing and what they want to do with their writing. But what I see from that, and I wrote about this in a blog post today on the Blue Ridge site, is what I see is a lot of people spending time on social media. A couple of people I had asked, if you spend as much time writing as you do on social media, you'd have your book done by now. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you really want to be a writer, you have to write. And the title of my blog post was, how much does your writing matter to your writing? At some point you have to say, I'm turning all this stuff off. Jerry Jenkins is a great example of that. When he goes in to compose, he has a special office. Of course, he's, a major bestseller now and stuff, but he's got a special office he goes to that I think he calls it the cave. It's got a phone, but the only person who can ring it is his wife. It's got a computer, but it doesn't connect to the internet. You can't email him there. He can't do internet research on that. He just makes a note if he has to look something up and keeps going, and he cranks out the pages. He's known for that. But to do that, he has to cut himself off from everything else, from the other distractions. And most wannabe writers are not willing to do that. They love talking about writing, but writers write. They sweat ink. Yeah,
they sweat ink. Well said. And I like your point about social media. I guess there's a good percentage of Americans who wrote a novel last year on Facebook alone. You probably know some of them. Of course, they're not writing fiction, but the amount of words they put there and the amount of time they spend scrolling through it, that could definitely be, that's some good writing time. That's some good writing time for sure. And there's other things. For me, I had to put video games away, which is really, really tough. I had to put music away. And if you know me, man, music was a big part of my life. And I eventually I was in a band and all that. And I had to tell the guys, like, I have to make choices. I only have so many hours in the day. And so the writing I'm doing is no longer going to be music. It's going to be novels, and it's going to be fiction. And so that was a tough one for me, but we make our choices, right? And
yeah, Jack Kavanaugh, whom you've had on here as a guest, Jack Kavanaugh has a line that he uses. What is it? He says he gave up everything. He gave up his social life. He stayed in and he worked and he worked and he worked to become an overnight success in about 10 years. And he said that's all it cost me was 10 years of my life to get that first book out. Now, it didn't take me that long. It doesn't take most people that long. It took that long, but man of great discipline. And he said, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to spend all my spare time, and I'm going to cut down on a lot of the other things I do so that I can write. And I know people who get up at 3 a.m. intentionally, not unintentionally like our family does, but they do that so they can write before they go to work. And they're willing to sacrifice that. Sleep and other stuff so that they can get the job done. Yeah. So it's not enough to want to be a writer. And this is probably one of the few professions where you can say this. It's not enough to want to be a writer, but you have to get on your butt and write, as opposed to get off your butt and do something. You got to get on your butt and do the writing.
Yeah. Stop moving around, sit down and do something. So the things you say to writers, sit down and do something. And that plays right into our next quote. We are coming up against the clock here, but I want to get this next one in, and then we can kind of move on. And I will have all these up again on the post, on the show notes. The rest of these are really good. They're things that you can kind of read and deduce for yourself. I'll keep them in bold, the important parts. But talks a little bit about symbolism and the process of writing. But going back to this idea of sitting on your butt and doing something. He says this to his daughter: nothing any good isn't hard. And you've never been brought up soft, or are you quitting on me suddenly? Darling, I love you, and I expect you to live up absolutely to what I laid out for you in the beginning. And I find that strangely passive aggressive and also encouraging all at the same time. But I love that quote: nothing any good isn't hard. I like to think that my books that I wrote are good, and they weren't easy. I can definitely tell you that. Now, they were enjoyable, but there are a lot of hours put into those novels, and enjoyable hours, sure, but not all of them were enjoyable. It's tough. You know this. You've done it several times. Let me ask you: has writing a novel gotten any easier for you?
In some ways, because there's the learning curve is flatter than it used to be, but it has never been easy. It has never been easy. Sometimes I'll have scenes that are very easy. For the Remnant thing, when I was writing the teaser, that was pretty easy. It's 1,000 words of one scene to create a lot of tension, and of course the idea is to leave it hanging, so I didn't have to have any resolution, and I just enjoyed that to no end. But as I write the rest of the book, there are going to be times when I want to quit.
Yeah, absolutely. So the learning curve is a little bit flatter, but it is still at maybe, say, a 45-degree angle uphill.
Yeah, at times it's almost 90 degrees at portions in the book. Yeah, for example, I don't have to think about Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I know if I'm writing book-length work, 350 pages, I know Act 1's going to end about 25% in. I don't care if it's 20. I don't care if it's 30, but it's someplace around 25%. Those are things I don't have to think about. I no longer have to think, am I using too many attributions in the dialogue? So those little things, I end up turning out some fairly clean copy. I still have to rewrite, but it's not as difficult as it once was to do that. Those kind of things got a little bit easier, but conceptualizing the story, creating the characters, making sure that the plot is tight enough, making sure there's enough drama, yada, 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 on and on it goes. And at times I keep thinking, well, this is the book that's going to prove I don't know how to write. And when you get that way, what you do is you just write anyway. Because when you go back and read it, you go, it's not so bad. This was much better than I remembered it. And that's because, you're still just all in sort of writer speak, all sweaty and stuff from the hard work of getting that scene down, and you think it's garbage. Every once in a while you write some of those. I have a few where I think no one's going to read this, and hit the old delete key.
Yeah, I've got those too, and I'm actually surprised at some of the people who find copies. I don't know where they find copy. I love this story. No, you don't. No, it's really good. No, first of all, it's not good, and if you love it, then there's something wrong with you. We can't be friends anymore. But yeah, I've written some stinkers myself, but that's pretty much what we have time for. I do want to check in with the room. Molly Jo says, I've always noticed that many or most artists are more emotional than normal people. I think it's that openness to emotions and that vulnerability to share those emotions is what makes us geniuses and creatives. It is the person who keeps themselves reserved and bottled up that cannot or will not be a great artist. Some good words there. Becky Lindsay says she often feels like she lives vicariously through some of her characters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Testa Groot says, for the reader, studies have shown that those emotions shown in stories teach empathy and how to deal with tough situations. I absolutely. I mean, fiction absolutely encourages empathy. I think that's one of some primary roles in our society. And maybe we should do a show where we talk about the function of fiction in our society. That's kind of more of an academic debate, but what role does it play? Is it past its prime? But I of course, since I write it, I believe it's very, very powerful. And I think teaching empathy is one of the biggest things that it can do. Testa Groot's mad that you were dissing Girl Scouts.
I wasn't dissing them. I was just, sigh.
I remember you saying that you hated the Girl Scouts and that you were going to rob the Girl Scouts of all their cookie money. Or was it just the cookies? I can't remember.
I would not diss the Girl Scouts because they bring those little cookies with the coconut on it and the caramel, and I can't eat them anymore. But nonetheless, I do remember them fondly.
The Girl Saints. That's what they're called. When they have cookie season, the Girl Saints, that's what they are. So, yeah. Marie Bass says she likes to write from a naked heart, so nothing is covered up and all is revealed. That's a good way of saying it. Sell your heart, write with a naked heart. Maybe that's like Molly Jo's sharing vulnerable emotions. And then Molly Jo says her first writing mentor told me to write every day with the promise that after a year I'd see a huge difference in quality just from the consistent discipline, which is true. So we're talking again about the discipline. Marie Bass says writing for her is like scratching that covering off the heart so it is naked. It is painful when I have to sit for hours just trying to get one scene right. That's true. And then Testa Group finally says you can't fix it if you don't write it. So some good opinions there, guys. And had a very active room tonight. Super happy to see that. So we had Becky here, Marie, Tess, Molly Jo. And Anne was here. Anne Mulligan was here. She may have fallen asleep. She's East Coast. And I do have that very sonorous voice, of course. So thank you all for listening. Pops, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I think today I'm going to say something a little bit different. I just realized I took my my lower third off when we disconnected. Anyway. Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference, and it's just the initials BRMCWC. I'm referring you to that because we post on our blog there. And again, I don't write a lot of blogs. I do it for the conference, barely do it for myself, but they're all writing related. And this particular week, I wax eloquent about getting your butt in the chair. We call it BIC, B-I-C, butt in chair, and reprioritizing your craft of writing.
Very good. Very good. And as always, you guys can find me at aarongansky.com. Again, don't forget to look up Hand of Adonai on Amazon and pre-order your copy. And Angela Horn just joined us. She says, finally got in on the end of it. So thank you, Angela. Thanks for joining us. And just in time for us to sign off, actually. So, but next week we are. Didn't see, this is something else I didn't check. I'm woefully underprepared tonight. Let me say this though. In regards to the first line, I'll check that immediately after our live cast here Wednesday night, and I'll post the winner on Facebook. That's what I'll do. I'll post it on Facebook. And so if you're interested in who won and you don't want to wait until the show notes come out on Sunday, you can go check there. And again, I'm at aarongansky.com. And we thank you all for listening. And until next week.
Which is Flannery O'Connor. You have it at the bottom of the notes. Yeah. Flannery O'Connor next week.
Flannery O'Connor. Oh my goodness. We should start right now. I could probably talk about her for a week. She's my favorite. So make sure you tune in next week and I'll fangirl out over some of the genius that is Flannery O'Connor. So until next week, thanks for listening. Bye.